So, good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to welcome you all, especially those online, for this guest research seminar from Professor Martha de Jong. So, the title is Smart Cities as Spatial Manifestations of the 21st Century Capitalism. So, he will present us one of his research projects. As a short introduction, I would like to read this bio, which is kind of very dense, but I'm trying to
make your selection.
I will try to make it simple, but I want to mention all your experience. So Martin holds a bachelor and master degree in public administration from Erasmus University Rotterdam and Leiden University. He completed his PhD at Delft University of Technology, Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management, on the topic of cross-national comparison of transport infrastructure investments. He spent time both at TU Delft and the Ministry of Transport to gain academic but also policy experience, because we discussed that yesterday, exactly. But academic impact is important, but also a more managerial and policy practical impact is very important for you, as for us at the Smart City Institute. He then spent 1 year at the University of Amsterdam at the Department of Geography and Planning as assistant professor, after which he returned to Delft and became assistant and associate professor of policy and organizations. He specialized in the topic of institutional transplantation, urban and infrastructure development, and policy making, in China. In this period, he has also been visiting scholars at various universities, and he was also in 2009 appointed part-time full professor at the School of Management, Harbin Institute of Technology, and in 2015, he was one of the 1,000 talent professor program at the School of International Relations of Public Affairs at Fudan University. In 2015, he was also appointed full professor on a special chair. It was an Anthony van Leeuwenhoek chair, and in China, where he stayed until 2018.
Did I make a mistake there?
2015, 2018.
Yeah, it was the same year.
It was the same year. And finally, in 2018, he accepted the position of academic director of the Erasmus Initiative for Dynamics of Inclusive Prosperity. So that's a cross-disciplinary research center on understanding and mitigating social inequality and exclusion. So where is still now, and which is he represents today. So welcome. The floor is yours. So we are very happy, and I will let you maybe precise a bit what I've tried to summarize now. Yeah. Thank you for being here in Liège today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Happy and proud to be here at the University of Liège, both for our bilateral collaboration and for boosting the unique collaboration. My talk will be, in fact, a little bit the culmination of years of research that I've done on city labels and how those city labels are used and why they are used. And it started off with actually a bibliometric study, which is now very popular, but back in 2015, not so much. And it ended in actually an overview of how modern capitalism operates. 3 articles published in the past couple of years play an important role in, for this presentation. The first one was published in Journal of Cleaner Production on city labels. It was about sustainable, smart, resilient, low-carbon, eco-knowledge cities. You can already guess that this is a very mouthful. Apparently, cities want to do something with those labels. Why? And what does it mean? The second was a more thorough version of that, published in the same journal in 2021, where we systematized the earlier study. This one is cited the most, but that one is better. And the third one is the most recent one in technological forecasting and social change, for that one, I did not only lean on early empirical studies and on those bibliometrical studies, but I also read libraries full of books about capitalism to understand, you know, how smart cities can be seen as a phenomenon of 21st capitalism. And that's what I will dwell on the second half of my presentation. I would say within reasonable boundaries, if you have questions along the way, please simply ask them. It makes the presentation more lively overall. And when we run into time trouble, then there are always measures to take. And this first slide shows you the initial set of city labels that we studied in the earliest article. Sustainable, eco, low carbon, green, livable, resilient, knowledge, ubiquitous, smart, intelligent, information, and digital. You see there's a great variety, and it's only a very tiny sub-selection of the total collection of such terms. What we did in those days, because web scraping for policy documents was hard on the web, we were leading on the academic literature, and we're basically bean counting. How many times is a typical city label mentioned in abstracts, in titles, in keywords? And that we found that overall the sustainable city back in those days was by far the most popular label used, followed by the smart city, and you can find your own, you know, favorite one more to the bottom. Some were, you know, clearly less used, such as the information or the digital city. Now, we try to map their evolution over time, and this is a graph from the earlier study, ranging the period 1996 to 2013, and you see that most of them are used and increasingly used. The use of city labels is growing fast, but two stand out. One is, as mentioned before, the sustainable city. The other is the smart city. And something exciting happened in the year 2012. That was the year that the smart city completely overtook the sustainable city. But since the study ended in 2013, we couldn't know if this was just an aberration or whether this was actually something structural that was happening. We also mapped the so-called co-occurrence, which is now actually common practice in bibliometric studies, but then it was still a little bit new because the whole software of mapping bibliometrics was new in Scopus. What you see here is the very large nodes. Here, the sustainable city, a very large node means used a lot. So this is apparently the figure for 546 mentionings. And the smart city and the digital city also appear big, but as you can see from this figure, they are a little bit more peripheral in those days. Sustainable city was almost connected, was the largest, but it was also the most connected with most of the others. Now those links mean that it is co-occurring. It's mentionings being used in the same article as the other one. So the green city and the sustainable city, for instance, they appeared a lot together, 10 times to be exact. But the sustainable city had no connection with the digital city, which is understandable because they're really about different topics. The digital city is really about digitization, whereas sustainability is more mostly an environmental, although there are, of course, often social and economic aspects identified. But the smart city, interestingly, you see that it's connected with both. It has its own cluster of the digital, the information, the intelligent, and the ubiquitous. Though the smart city is a little bit different in meaning than the sustainable city, but it's not as you know, outside of the group as the digital city is. So this is about, you know, what they mean. And we found, and that's what you get in the next slide, is we made a table, a matrix in which we identified how often the label was mentioned and that it was the frequency, was it above or below 100, and how distinct it is in meaning. And then we found that some terms, like the green city, intelligent, information, ubiquitous, and livable city, they didn't have a clear theoretical background. There were not many articles specifying what theory was underlying them. There is no green city theory identified. And the information city also isn't clear. The ubiquitous city is actually a specifically South Korean phenomenon, where it came first, and when recently it's not so much used anymore. 10 years ago, it was cool to have Wi-Fi everywhere and to have sensors everywhere was new. South Korea was a front runner. Nowadays, it's not so special because nearly any smart city can claim this. But on the top, you have terms such as the sustainable city and the smart city and the low carbon city, for instance. And they have a very clear theoretical meaning. The low carbon city, for instance, originated from the debate of climate change and the reduction of carbon outputs by societies. And so the low carbon city would then be urban measures to fight carbon dioxide emission. The resilient city, likewise, it's preparing your city for tough events so that it can rebound if things get rough. Likewise, sustainable city has the triple bottom line theory underlying it. So that makes it more comprehensive. And the fact that it's an umbrella for many different things also partly explains why it is so popular. You know, who is against sustainability? Then you must really be a cynic. The smart city had more a digitization debate behind it, at least initial. The digital infrastructures were at the origin of the smart city. Actually, the digital city had the same, but the smart city is by most theorists seen as an enhancement of the digital city because it is smarter. It's not only building the infrastructure, it's also having a whole ecosystem around it to make it work better. And the eco-city had a more ecological set of theories around it. In those days, the findings were that maybe in the policy debate, those 12 city categories or labels were mostly used interchangeably, simply by urban governments that wanted to vulgarize, we used that word yesterday in debate, to vulgarize their meaning, their popularity, but that in the world of the theoretical literature, actually these terms were not always interchangeable. In those days, the smart city and the sustainable city were two different things. You could not simply swap the one for the other. The sustainable city was the most dominant one, and it was primarily linked to the eco-city and the green city because of its ecological background. But we also saw that the smart city and the low carbon city were coming up, and that the smart city had even undertaken the sustainable city. The others, such as the knowledge city and the resilient city, were they were somewhat related, but the knowledge city had regional economic literature behind it, and the resilient city had the resilience literature behind it, and that evokes different ideas. Now, the question was, would the growth of this smart city continue after 2015? And the answer is yes. Because here we had an intermediate update of the count, just a very simple count from 0 to 900. And you see that all of the others are hovering a little bit above the ground, with the sustainable city going up, but not exponentially. But the smart city did grow more than substantially. It was larger than all of the others combined, even. And likewise, our picture of the co-occurrences had changed from the earlier version in 2015 to this version in 2018. And there, the smart city had a larger node than the sustainable city, and it had really maneuvered itself more to the center. Interestingly, also, this shows that the smart city had increased not only in number, but also in meaning. It was able to absorb the meaning of the sustainable city into it. Nowadays, to speak of sustainable smart cities or smart sustainable cities is not seen as very strange anymore. It is as if they have evolved into largely the same thing, which wasn't the case a few years previously. So also in terms of meaning, things were shifting. And the smart city seemed like a bit of a chameleon that was able to absorb all the positives from all the others, making the others less popular and itself more popular. In our 2021 article, to which we are now making the transition, you see that I'm not even able to use a regular numbering anymore. We use a logarithmic scale here. And you see still that the smart city is over the 1,000, heading towards the 10,000, and all the others have not even reached the 1,000. So this tendency continues, and there is something with a smart city that all the others don't have. What we did here, we used them, there's another phenomenon that we spotted. The set of city labels was also expanding dramatically. We found 180 different city labels. But we only use 35 here because the other one were more or less incidental. But here we also use the creative city, the virtual city, the entrepreneurial city, the connected city, the solar city, you name them. Yeah.
May I ask you just which literature did you search? So all literature, so it can be
everything in Scopus.
Okay.
Everything in Scopus.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can study whatever the disciplines.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Then it was not connected to any particular discipline. In a side study, we did map which disciplines were mostly involved in which issues, and then you see variety. But then most of these terms don't have a clear literature either. But the smart city was largely based on two literatures. Literatures on urban development, which was more recent, and literature on engineering, which was where it originally came from. The others had different background. And what we found particularly interesting was two things. The use of city labels was growing dramatically. To be doing something urban is cool, much cooler than in the previous decades. There is something about cities that is new and exciting. And the smart city has this in particular. It's apparently able to offer a lot of things that are attractive for the future. And later on, we found also profit-wise attractive. There is a business model behind the smart city, and that explains why it's more attractive than the others. For your background information, I can easily share the slides. Here we made a ranking of which city label appeared in which year and how it was ranked compared to the others over time. So you see, for instance, that the sustainable city was there right from the start. It ranked #1 all the time until 2014. Actually, a year happened, and then went down, and the smart city overtook. The smart city originated around 1999, was first a small player until people discovered its secret. And you can find for your own favorite label when they originated and how popular they became. And the same applies to this picture. We'll not get into much detail here. It shows how those co-occurrence figures evolved over time and which labels appeared when and how large they became. And here we see the table in absolute numbers across the years. That was important background information, of course, to justify this article, but it would get too much, getting in too much detail now to deal with that here. We also conducted a growth study. And we found, actually we identified 3 stages: the infant stage, the growth stage, and the mature stage. It was through this logistic growth model, we kind of wanted to make a prediction of how long each city label would live. And then we found that some were already at the end of their lifeline. Sorry, there's a sneeze. Oh, there was almost a sneeze coming. At the end of the lifeline, the knowledge city, and certainly the ubiquitous city, which is understandable because ubiquitous city, we don't see it so much anymore. It has already done its time. We see that a lot of them are more or less in the middle range, including the smart city. We also see, interestingly, that although the sustainable city is already old, it probably will outlive many of the others, including the smart city and the eco city. And this is based, on a kind of extrapolation of how quickly, so to put it, how solidly they've grown over time. So if they grow slowly but surely, then presumably they have a longer life. And if they grow very fast, but decreasingly so in recent years, then maybe their growth curve will be flattening in the future. Now, this is to some extent speculative, but it's an interesting exercise to see what you can derive from past developments. So more recently, we were wondering what makes this smart city, after a lot of trial and error, more popular than the others. What is its secret? And then we were simply scanning the web to see how much money you can make with a smart city. You know, I made a transfer from an engineering university to a business school. My focus changed. I was interested in money again. And here we came. Netherlands research found that in 2017, the size of the smart city global market was 40.1 billion. And in 2026, it was 97.7 billion estimation, of course. But the second study by Markets and Markets was a little bit bolder than that. It would claim that in 2022, it already amounted to $511.6 billion. But in 2027, it would have more than doubled. And even more, can I put it, courageous was market research community study, which indicated that in 2021, the global market for smart city development was already 1,060 billion. I wonder, is that probably is 1 trillion then actually? Is that right? I don't know. I'm not so good at English numbers. And that in 2030, it would be $7,347 billion. These are only estimates. We don't know. Probably they are not correct. We don't know because marketeers have made it into their hobby and lifeline to boast numbers in order to make the markets look attractive. Their job is to attract investors in this case. So it's not surprising that the numbers are high. However, if the numbers are impressive anyway. How high, we can't tell. We don't know whether the first, the second, or the third study is right because the boundaries of the smart city are not so easy to draw. Do we only take, you know, the hard digital infrastructures into account? Do we include all the software development around it? Does it include the real estate in which many of these facilities are hosted? Do we even include transport access roads to those facilities? It's difficult to know exactly where the boundaries of those smart cities lie and which elements have and have not been included in the study by each of those bureaus. The outcome, nonetheless, is that there is money to be earned in this market. There is a whole discourse around it. And this discourse is that it's good for you. Smart cities are good for you. They are hailed as vehicles to make our life more intelligent, more sustainable, more comfortable, more efficient. Actually, whatever you want, the technology can do for you, as long as you use it right. And who wants to be called dumb? So to be a smart citizen ruled by smart governance in the smart city is something that very few people will reject. And that, of course, adds to its popularity. And I'm sure that marketeers have contributed to this narrative. However, there have always been detractors. It's not that everybody has been embracing this concept wholeheartedly right from the beginning. Especially in three aspects have we seen resistance. We've seen resistance in aspects of exclusion, saying, you know, that the not so well educated and the elderly don't have the same knowledge of digital technology that we do, and that therefore they may lose track of what's happening. I have friends and elderly people I know in their 70s who have recently discovered the smartphone, but don't know how to pick the phone up when their WhatsApp rings, for instance. It happens. It's inconvenient. I know people who find it difficult to handle the buying of a transport ticket. even if it's at the station in France or Spain, for instance. It's a difficulty for them, and often the suppliers of those infrastructures found it too expensive to create special facilities for the vulnerable groups. And if then the government doesn't step in, they actually get increasingly excluded from many facilities that sometimes they simply need to survive. There are also issues with privacy. We know that we are often clicking, accept the conditions. That's a normal click to do because you want your product fast or you want the information fast. But your data will be used, and we know it. Maybe we accept it, we don't like it, but we accept it. But there are privacy issues. Google knows exactly where I have been in the past year, whether I like it or not. And if I like it, they can even tell me at what hour, on what day, in what location I could be found. And they can use this. They can use this to sell it to other companies so that they can spot us when I'm near them and they can sell their products. They can tell me when a good pizzeria is around the corner. So, and if I happen to be hungry, I may give into the trap. Those are privacy concerns. Can also be used if they fall into the wrong hands, really against us. If you want to blackmail a future president, this is also the way to go. And then finally, there are issues of security. And in security, it is basically when we are contacted by people who pretend to be banks, mostly for bank information. It can also be other types of information, but it's primarily criminals after our money and sometimes in vast amounts. You can also be contacted on WhatsApp. And the less savage you are, the less savvy you are in using the digital technologies, the more you are likely to give in to such pressures and lose a lot of money. Now, those three things, exclusion, privacy, and security, are generally identified by detractors as the downsides of the smart city. Optimists will say, we can fix that. Our government will handle it, or we will encourage entrepreneurs to be responsible, or we will fix this technologically. So optimists think we can fix this. And pessimists will say this will change our society forever. There are indications, as for instance, in the emergence of the smart society in China, that the detractors are not very far away from the truth. That in fact, the systems can learn to control you. And this is on its way in societies with weak citizen control and strong technological development. There is actually reason for concern in this case. Now, but overall, the picture is that the smart cities remain popular and that all the cities who can afford it will want to be smart and that they have to deal with issues. Now, this growing importance and market share made me think, how does the smart city development fit in the broader societal economic development that we are facing? To what extent is it different from capitalist models as they have existed in the past centuries? We have seen marketplaces that were used for the exchange of goods and sometimes services. We have seen after industrializations that factories emerge with assembly line production, where people could be exploited and where the gap between the haves and the have-nots was rising. We have seen maybe more mitigated versions of that in the late 20th century when most people transferred to offices and where we had ecological modernization in the sense that the dirty manufacturing could be outplaced outside of the city or even outsourced to developing countries, where the more developed world would sit proudly in front of a computer to produce knowledge. But I believe that as the internet becomes increasingly pervasive and savvy, just understanding this as knowledge production in offices is not sufficient to understand what's really happening. So the question then is, what are the main characteristics of 21st century capitalism in which smart development plays such an essential role? And if the smart city is indeed such an important phenomenon, in what spatial manifestations does it present itself? Now, in order to understand the long-term development, perhaps we should move to what capital is in the first place. I'm looking a little bit to Nathalie and Audrey. Until what time?
You have at least 25 minutes. So
yeah, okay. So roughly until 11 o'clock.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
okay, perfect. No, that's more than fine. In my view, capital, which is now being extended to many spheres of life, it simply began with the invention of currency. The invention of currency, where coins could be used as a very light version to replace barter, as a flexible way to replace barter in the exchange of goods, is at the origin of what we now call, like, let's say, the monetization and the quantification and the measurement of society. But whatever we have in society should be measured, and that if we measure it, we can control it and improve it. According to me, the invention of currency was a line at the roots of it. It allowed people to calculate the value of what it was they owned and what it was that they wanted to own. It allowed for a much easier exchange, but the really smart people, they would not only do the calculation and the exchange, but they will actually save some of that money as storage. And if you have, because if maybe you don't need your coins now, you can use them tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, you can collect more of them and maybe buy something larger or become increasingly powerful. Now, this storage, perhaps you could say, is the earliest manifestation of accumulation. Those who accumulate the currency, they become stronger because everything is basically at the end of their feet. Over time, this use of money became increasingly sophisticated. After trading, we had banking, allowing for the use of much larger amounts of capital. We developed investment. And if people were not, we could use, for instance, banking notes, get them from one place, say in Florence, and we could go to Bruges, which was another, powerhouse in those days, and you could get currency for this bill. And so the use of those coins and banknotes and all kinds of value papers became so sophisticated that banking and investment emerged. But in order to control that it was using somewhat soundly and not too corruptly, accountancy was developed. Because, for instance, the King of France or the King of Spain wanted to know if the courtiers were stealing from his resources. So if he had an accountancy system that allowed him to monitor how much money he had and who was using the money for what purpose, he could also know whether people were corrupt or not. And the most recent, call it the 20th century version of the evolution of capitalism is marketing. Knowing better what your audience or your public wants, so you can influence your production of goods and services in a direction that you estimate that those customers want. But the less rosy version, of course, is also trying to influence the preferences of your public so that they will want to consume more, or in even later terms, to control the flow of their hormones or other body parts in such a way that they cannot control their emotions and they want to rush by. If I see my children play games, I know they use tricks to get them addicted. And that's, in my view, also a part of marketing. Marketing these days is used very sophisticatedly to get people addicted and to let them spend more than they actually want. And which is not always beneficial for their health. In fact, rather the opposite. With capitalism, I will come to the expansion of these 5 types on the next slide. Capitalism then would be a legal system with individual property rights, markets and widespread commodity exchange on those markets, firms producing goods or services for profit, production no longer taking place at home in the family, but normally outside in productions or offices, in factories or offices. Widespread labor and employment contracts, not slavery, but official bilateral contracts, and a developed financial system allowing for much larger quantities to be traded, sometimes perhaps irresponsibly large quantities. Now this definition is basically a combination of Karl Marx and Joseph Schumpeter. I think Karl Marx missed one aspect, which was, I believe, number 6, and Schumpeter missed number 5 or something. If you put them together, as Jeffrey Hodgson does, you see his book here, has influenced my thinking a lot, then you come to this definition. However, what Hodgson doesn't do, but what on what point I beg to differ with him, is to what extent is this interpretation of capital bent beyond its original meaning. Everybody knows what financial capital is, and we can also easily imagine what physical capital is. Everything that is a visible, tangible product, can be liquidated and then be turned into money. And if it's buildings or infrastructures, maybe they are not worth as much as they were when they were constructed. Still, they can be, converted relatively easily into financial capital. So they are worth money. And in some cases, such as in the current housing market, maybe they are worth more than they were when they were built 20 years ago. So physical capital is real capital. But the 3, the 4, and the 5, according to Jeffrey Hodgson, are not real capital and should be distinguished from it clearly. However, what modern society tries to do is to calculate how much a forest or a park is worth. And then if maybe you sacrifice it for physical development, how much you should compensate. And if you want to construct a forest elsewhere. So we have gone into the direction of capitalizing nature. Also, the value of our own skills, whatever we have learned from our parents, from our peers, on the job market, at the university, is worth money, has added to our knowledge, our applicable knowledge. It's harder exactly to pinpoint how much this is worth because it's highly context dependent, but we do tend to be dealt with as if we are worth money. We know how much money we earn every month, and that's apparently what, according to the labor market, we are worth. And maybe if we think we are not valued enough, we'll try to apply for something else. But if the labor market doesn't want this, maybe we are more conservative, we're already happy that we have what we have. But human capital then is also a monetization of what we can do. And the social capital is a monetization of the goodwill and the networks that we own, which can also be converted eventually, much more difficultly than physical capital, but eventually can still be turned into money. So we have learned to basically monetize everything around us. And then you get this kind of picture if you see what this implies for the modern information age. So if we then look at 21st century capitalism, it has a number of characteristics that are in a way the culmination of the evolution that this system has seen since before Christ. It has grown increasingly complex. Very few people understand what is currently happening at stock markets. You have to be very trained mathematicians taking astronomical amount of risk to exactly understand, what is underlying it. And sometimes it goes wrong. Most people, they just follow the crowds when they go to the stock market and hope they can get something out of it. But it's actually quite opaque what they can learn. The same applies to all kinds of technical systems that we have in place. If there is a technical disruption at the airport, how many people among us are able to solve the issues? We have to lean on very specialized people who can do this job, because a combination of traditional technology and digital technology combined into one, just like bioengineering, for instance. So this complexification has made us very vulnerable, but at the same time, very sophisticated. And a high level of commodification. Basically, we have an almost automatic tendency to convert everything around us into money value, to see it as a commodity. Can we trade it? How much can we earn from it? How much is it worth? Value, of course, there is still use value. I sometimes praise my bicycle because it didn't cost me much, but it's being useful to me every day. But when I want to sell it, the use value is irrelevant. And people look at it, how old is it? And how much has it been used before? Are there any missing technical parts? So this commodification is all around. And even if we make digital twins, for instance, of the ocean, or digital twins of other planets, we still wonder, can we live there? Can we use the resources there? If we know what's underneath the polar cap, can we use that? Can we delve it? Can we sell it? Whatever we do, even if we find it immoral, we have a tendency to commodify, and certainly vested interests too, even if we ecologists don't want it. So natural, human, and social capital are valued to some extent for their own sake, but if we feel that physical and financial capital are more attractive, this conversion still takes place. Maybe in Europe now we have comparatively little nature left, so there is little nature to be converted to physical and financial capital, but in most parts of the world, just look at South America, just look at Southeast Asia, this is still happening on a massive, massive scale, and not even, you know, physical and financial capital that is particularly valuable. You know, agricultural land has a much lower value than, say, high-tech land. And yet the conversion from nature to this agricultural land, even for biomass or for corn, is happening on a massive scale. We are still doing this. It is going on in full swing, and maybe individuals are opposed to it, but the process continues. According to geographer David Harvey, the development of smart cities, which are at the end of this developmental line, at least for the time being, should be seen as a spatial fix. Well, actually, he coined the term for other areas. A temporary spatial fix is a place where capitalists put their money as a temporary storage. Because if you have money, you don't want to keep it under your bed. You want to invest it somewhere. And it must be an investment with the highest level of expected profit. So if it is believed that digitization is the future, then you should store all your money, probably in the millions or even the billions, into those areas where this digitization is taking place. So investors put their resources into those smart cities and do this on the private side or on the public side to attract the other types of capital, human capital, social capital, to contribute their resources, their knowledge, and their networks into this digitization process. However, if maybe the output and the return on investment in 20 years is not as high as now, or turns out to be much lower than expected, they will just as easily pull out their money again, and then it really has become a temporary spatial fix for storing your capital. But you no longer need it because maybe there are new technologies or new developments that are more attractive at that time. And what remains is a rust belt, the same we know it for industrial areas that were left out. So if you see the smart city as that kind of spatial fix, it is only basically a tool in the hands of some, you know, almost inevitable accumulation process. However, attractive that it may be in terms of accumulating more wealth, it is very serious social and ecological consequences of which we are all aware. You know, ever since the donut economy, we know what ecological overshoot is, using more natural resources than the planet can endure, and offering people less than they need to get by. So there is ecological overshoot and socio-economic undershoot. Some people grow rich, but most stay at the same level or decrease. We feel this now even in Europe. Roughly in the period 1950 to 1980, the gap in income and wealth was decreasing. This was a period in which actually social and Christian democracy managed to decrease inequality in societies. However, since 1980, as for instance also Piketty has shown, this has been turned back. Capital has grown stronger again and labor is weaker. And in my own country and potentially also in Belgium, maybe income inequality is not increasing dramatically because the tax levels are still such that you can normally live on a minimum income, excluding housing prices. But the taxing of capital is notoriously low, which makes that the level of wealth inequality is still increasing dramatically. People who really know how to handle money, they don't earn it as an employee. They earn it, of course, as a company. And they manage to funnel funds away to areas with more attractive tax levels, or to make it a company taxation rather than income taxation. And therefore, it's harder and harder for governments to maintain the equality level that they used to. Hence the socioeconomic undershoot. In the level of production, we see there is a growing extraction of data. The big tech companies, but also all kinds of software handlers are extracting data from whatever is happening. They subsequently process them through all kinds of sophisticated software companies that do modeling with their data to predict future developments. And these data are stored, hopefully not lost, so they can always be used for future purposes. The data are not used once, but multiple times. And apparently data now are seen as the new gold. Sometimes it puzzles me how much they can be worth or how much they are believed to be worth. But in the economic process, it's not what is real that attracts investors, but what they expect things to do in the future. So the total picture then is accelerated capital accumulation from this economic development, an increasingly complex set of government arrangements to make the resource extraction and capital conversion possible, and expensive data extraction and surveillance. Now, this level of surveillance differs. Some societies have more surveillance than others. Mostly, you can say in North America, surveillance by the private sector is very strong. If you go to formerly communist countries, then the surveillance by the state is very strong. In both cases, innocuous citizens are the looters. What does this smart city then look like? It's not always called smart city. Smart city is just a catch-all term for a lot of different phenomena. It can produce different kinds of products and services. It can lean on different resources.
Can you define what you, because that's, I think, key. What is a smart city? Because you use the term all the time, but so what is a smart city?
So here we go.
Okay.
So we identify in this article 6 different manifestations. Now, one of them is a relatively small scale, and let's say the original double helix. You could come across the term science park or smart campuses. In that case, it's primarily interaction between universities and spin-offs from universities, especially engineering schools, of course, where they tend to have the leading roles, and companies that are leaning on that knowledge for product and service development. They are comparatively a small scale, but they are highly popular because maybe they are seen even as the essence of it. If you upscale them, if you make them much larger, then of course you need to include the residential function. Often the enhanced versions, which are much larger, many square kilometers, and with people actually living there, then you call them innovation districts. And then those smart products can of course also be used for the smart housing that surrounds those campuses. Innovation districts then normally have both education and knowledge production by industry and the residential areas around them. Here the government tends to be stronger than there, but of course even here the government will accommodate this development. and perhaps subsidize it. In the third case, it's primarily residential areas and smart neighborhoods, but there the smart services are used to make residential areas more sophisticated so that people can run their smart house, smart street, you know, in the way they want based on information technology. In the fourth case, the municipal government is very ambitious, perhaps also more socially aware, and it wants to cover the entire municipal area with smart services. That is seen as more inclusive, but at the same time, it relies on massive capital investment because often it's not profitable to do this kind of offer in vulnerable neighborhoods. So governments, local governments, perhaps helped by national governments, have to step in to prepare also vulnerable areas for smart services. In a tiny project that I do with a postdoc, we are investigating whether vehicle-to-grid facilities, so basically the loading of electricity for cars, where in the cities it's happening, and it's mostly in the wealthy areas for understandable reasons. And what it takes to also develop them in poorer neighborhoods, how this is done in different cities in Europe, and what the ups and downs are of this and how much it costs. But that would be then smartifying the citywide area, if you wish. From a totally different origin, but having serious spatial ramifications, are urban platforms where services are offered online, mostly for delivery, but those deliveries take place in the real world, not in the virtual world. So a smart city based on urban platforms is less structured, but nonetheless very important, because you have to create the transport facilities to make the servicing possible. And finally, in the sixth version is uncommon, but also the most popular among aware citizens, are the alternative smart city spaces, where citizens build their smart city by themselves based on their own knowledge and their own resources. They are a colleague of mine, Paolo Gerli, but also Luca Mora is involved, whom you know. They wrote an article in the same special issue that we wrote this one for, and they mapped around 35 initiatives across Europe with bottom-up smart city developments, where basically similar smart services were offered in terms of transport, in terms of running your house smoothly, or ordering products, or let's say open access systems for building your own house, for instance, open source urbanism, they call it. All these things are offered, but they each run into the same problem. They cannot scale it up because they don't have the financial and knowledge resources to do it. And they also have to rely on local government for all kinds of permits. And since governments see this as a potential threat to their own power, and since industries maybe find this not profitable and perhaps also see them as a competitor, they have difficulty growing. So my personal feeling would actually be that if you want to take responsible smart city seriously, we should not only know what's happening here, but we should also encourage government and industry to be supportive of this development rather than dismissive. The trouble, of course, is if they are very competitive, then they will not do that. So they will not automatically support this. It will be hard. Now, in the previous slides, it may have seemed as if capitalist evolution is some kind of ineluctable force that we cannot stop because capitalists are acting in particular ways and because citizens have all kinds of limitations. To some extent, this is true, but it does matter in which kind of institutional system we are operating because all kinds of markets hang together. And if you give governments more influence on smart city development by taking the largest share in their provision. This has an impact in how they operate, both positive and negative. So the literature to study this more closely would be the varieties of capitalism literature, in which we can see what the possible consequences are of structuring your institutions in particular ways and what this generates as societal outcomes. Now, the classical division, which is of course very Eurocentric, is to distinguish liberal democratic economies from corporate democratic economies. And then the liberal democratic economies, you would be running on a democratic system with representative government, but as much as possible of the good and service provision should be done from the private sector. So labor markets should not be interfered much. There should be no minimum salary or a low minimum salary, say. Education markets, wherever private players can offer educational services, why not? They probably do this in the most efficient way. Similar with housing markets and transport markets, they are to some extent also interconnected with each other, so there is mutual influence. In corporatist democratic economies, obviously the government is stronger, often also in consultation with employers and employee unions. However, this picture, which obviously has influence on what a smart city looks like, is not comprehensive because it already excludes France. France is not covered in those two models, and even less Japan, China, Saudi Arabia, or Brazil. So if we really want to develop the varieties of capitalism literature in a more sophisticated direction, we have to be more sophisticated on what markets we identify and which players influence them. But what we can already say at this point is how institutions are structured does matter for the limitations that capitalist evolution undergoes. We cannot abolish capitalism by decree. I don't even know how to do that. But what we can imagine is how can we shave off the hard edges of it by at least making it more palatable for weaker groups, and perhaps by strengthening the position of social enterprises or universities vis-a-vis, industry, so that you can provide the services that governments need, citizens need, also the weaker ones. I think it's worthwhile considering, what that would look like. And then, of course, we have to build on existing foundations, because we are I believe in path dependency. I do not believe that we can start something new from scratch, but being aware of where we stand in different systems, and then thinking through what do we need to boost bottom-up rather than top-down development of smart cities, I think would really help us forward. I wonder whether it is... let's just recap the main messages. I think that's beneficial. So we see an enormous amount of urban techno-branding happening, increasingly. Circular, eco, resilient, smart, sponge. All these city labels are used as vehicles to attract massive capital investment. Cities want to be smart, or any of the other things, because they can lean on more employment eventually, and it is also also implies more revenue in their municipal coffers. But apparently, among this entire collection, the smart city has particularly seen an explosion, and it has overtaken all the others in meanings roughly since 2012. And to me and my colleagues, this has indicated that actually this is a strong indicator of that it is the spatial fix of the 21st century capitalism. Now, smart cities are not one thing. They show many manifestations, and I've only given here the spatial manifestations. But if you look at the types of services and goods that are produced, they're also massive varieties. And if you look at the input of different types of data, they also show massive variety. But they, let's say, as a collection of phenomena, you can call them smart cities. Some even would say that they are now evolving into autonomous or AI cities, and that even smart cities are at the end of their lifeline. But I would prefer to remain out of that debate for now. Different varieties of capitalism will influence ecological overshoot and socio-economic undershoot in different ways, and that matters. So capitalism cannot be stopped, but the way we mitigate its negative consequences, that we can influence. And the fifth question, I think, is irrelevant in the context of current discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.